we are very happy to be joined here by Eugene McCartan, who's the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Ireland. It's got a great name too. Eugene, thank you so much for being with us.
Good afternoon or good evening, whichever it is.
Well, I wanted to start here. I think a lot of people in the United States, especially who don't know much about the history of Ireland, don't even really think of Ireland as a victim of British imperialism. So I was hoping to actually start there. If you could give us just some context of how the British Empire has over the years, attacked and subjugated the Irish people.
That's you should never ask an Irish person about history because you have to have about 3 or 4 hours here at your disposal. So, and to list the crimes of British imperialism in Ireland. So, briefly, I suppose for the past 600-700 years, the Irish people have experienced the occupation and colonialism of the neighbouring island of Britain. And in that period of time, many of the policies, instruments of repression, mechanisms of control that the British applied across the empire were first practiced in Ireland. They were first road tested to see how effective they were and how useful they would be. And the tactic has always been primarily at the very bottom. The bottom line has always been divide and rule, and that has been the characteristic of the British Empire right across the world, is of divide and rule. Whether it be in Ireland from the using religion whenever religion was a potent force in people's lives, we're using religion as a weapon of division, to food when the Great Famine, when half the population were virtually starved to death or left the country, weapon was used as food was used as a weapon. Land was used as a weapon. So we've all had those practiced upon the people of Ireland by the British. That has continued up to this day. That divisions in the north is somewhat, they would use the terms, the British present themselves as being the arbitrators, the referees between two warring religious factions that mask their political role, their economic role, their military role. That the divisions in the north of Ireland are not about what church you go to or what religion or what way you interpret the Bible. It's about where democracy must lie. Those from the nationalist Republican tradition believe that national democratic unitary state is the way in which they can secure their rights, whereas loyalism, unionism, believes that they can only find protection within the confines with or under the umbrella of or the patronage of being linked to British imperialism. So it's not about religion, it's about where the destiny of the people lies. And the British cleverly play the religious card to sustain and maintain their own political and economic interests in the north of Ireland, thereby the rest of Ireland. So the royal family, I've tried to avoid it for the last 5 or 6 days, to be honest, but it's almost impossible. That even all newspapers in Ireland and news television, while we're nominally a republic here in the south in Dublin, there is a tremendous amount of fawning over the royal family, over the Queen, very apologetic about having to express any sort of questions about Irish history and the role the British played, and whether it be the suppression of the 1916 Rising, the violence inflicted upon the people during the War of Independence, the subsequent promotion of the war against Republicans who wished to push forward for the ending to prevent partition of Ireland. So the British have had an active hand in all those situations. And I just noted you're coming from Kenya, I mean, all those policies and everything else have all been tried, whether it be in Malaya, Kenya, South Africa. I mean, the concentration camps were first developed by the British in South Africa. Uh, so these are all historical things. The Burma and wherever else they've been, India, in China. I mean, they talk about the war on drugs today in Latin America. The British went to war twice against the Chinese over the Opium Wars. So it's say they have a war against drugs when it suits them and a war against drugs when it doesn't suit them. But today, I think but the whole idea about royalty, I think which is most important thing, it is about the justification of class and class privilege. It's about reinforcing that dominant narrative. There are people who are born to rule and to govern. And there are those who are governed. And I think that is saying, I mean, that is whether so it's about reinforcing this concept of a class divided society as being normal, natural, and it is the order of things. It is the order of things, and I think that's where we have to deal with this question. It is this approach that it is about justification of privilege, a justification of a class society. I know in the United States they try to mask this idea that there is no class within the United States, but obviously there clearly is, and that is why the United States is so fatuated by this death of this parasitic element in London, because it is there if the ruling elite, of the bankers and financiers of Wall Street, or of all the other sort of hedge funds and everything else, if they could establish a royalty, they would do it. But it's not at this moment in time possible. The material conditions are not there, but they have the same class distinctions. They have the same class belief that they are better than everybody else, that everybody else is subservient and to their needs and interests, and everybody is to be used to advance their needs and interests. And so the royalties are about reinforcing as they would call it here in Ireland, the relic of all decency, the relic of feudalism that is the royalty.
Yeah, I think like from everything you just said, I think what the important takeaway is, as we discuss all of the sort of crimes of British Empire around the world, is that it's all still relevant today. Like it's not just something that happened in history that we're remembering because it's important to remember when bad things happen in history. It's the way that it still matters today. So I'm just curious, could you just very briefly like explain how the crimes of the British Empire in Ireland are still relevant to Ireland today?
Well, they are still very much so. We've just come out of a period of armed conflict between the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, and the British state. We've witnessed many atrocities, from Bloody Sunday to the Ballymurphy massacre. We've seen internment where hundreds of people were arrested without trial. We have seen the shoot to kill policy, which basically is state-directed killings, the state collusion with loyalist paramilitaries and the state-directed killings. There's all of those things, and all of them. You see the royal families walking in the parades, following the coffin, bearing their military uniforms of their regiments, which they are the heads of. That would be the parachute regiments and various other regiments. So they are part and parcel of what was the British system of oppression in the 6 counties in the north of Ireland. They're part and parcel of that whole British apparatus that still continues to exist. The military intelligence operations that still exist and take place every day of the week in the north of Ireland, in Belfast and Derry and other such places. And we also remember that Queen that we were talking about. She was actually responsible for the dismissing of the Australian government in early 1970s. The Wolf Whitman government was dismissed by the Queen, by the Privy Council, because they didn't like his politics. They didn't like his policies that he was implementing in Australia. And the same goes for Diego Garcia, the military base. The people there had won a case preventing their island being taken over by both US and British armed forces, and the Privy Council basically overruled the decisions, and those people lost their homeland. So this is not something which is irrelevant in the past. This is something which is real, meaningful, has real power, and has real substance. And when the British state itself goes into crisis, the Privy Council, the Queen, the aristocracy, all come into play as a stabilising factor in these processes. So it's not something which goes back into the past. It is ever present. It is ever influential. And as I say, it's about reinforcing the dominant narrative that privilege, of class division, of exploitation, and and to a degree, white power in Britain. And that's what it is. And that's the one of the fracture lines within that royal family is the deep racism that exists within them, because they have existed based upon the super exploitation of the empire and the dominion and the demonization of those whom they colonized, whom they believed were inferior, either in colour, religion, or whatever else, or by birth. That there's a whole sense of superiority that oozes out of the pores of these people on a daily basis.
No, I think that's very, very well taken point, really all the points, but certainly that last one I think is so key in the reinforcement of class privilege. I appreciate that perspective. Well, Eugene McCartan, Communist Party of Ireland, really appreciate you giving us some of your time. I know it's late over there. Here on the
Thank you very much. No problem.